Recently, I was at my local hobby store and I found this Luna Rocketship model. It's very simple, and I thought it'd be cool to turn into some type of a diorama and maybe even a lamp. So in this video, that's exactly what we're going to do. Like I said in the intro, this is a very simple model. It's only a few pieces and it only took me a few minutes to put together. When I first picked up this model, I thought it was just some 1950s, 60s retrofuturism kind of model. Turns out, it's actually from a film called Destination Moon, which came out in 1950 and is about a group of people who go to the moon on a ship called Luna. According to the Destination Moon Wikipedia page, which is the best place to find info on obscure 1950s science fiction films, Destination Moon was the first major US science fiction film to deal with the practical, scientific, and engineering challenges of space travel, and it was the first to speculate on what a crewed expedition to the moon would look like. Which is actually pretty cool because this film came out in 1950, and the first manned space flight wasn't until 1961, over 10 years later, and the first man on the moon wasn't until 1969, almost 20 years later. Anyways, I just thought that was kind of cool. I really had no idea this film even existed when I was building this project, and I only really found out when doing this voiceover. As you can see, the top of the rocket doesn't quite fit together well. I think it's just an older model, and at some point it was probably in a hot garage or shop somewhere and just got a bit warped from the heat. I tried to do a bit of fixing off camera with my heat gun and a bit of persuasion, but it still doesn't fit together perfectly, and I have to do a bit of filling with some super glue and sanding with a sanding stick. Model filler putty probably would have been the best for this, but I don't really have any of that, so I'm just going to use some super glue and then sand it down with my sanding stick like I said. Luckily, these seams are on the side, and so you don't really see them in the end, especially after a couple coats of paint and primer. Once I'm happy enough with the surface finish, I move on to painting. I add a quick pin in the back to help me hold it while I'm painting, and then it gets a coat of flat black primer. The paint is very simple. I'm just going to be using this gunmetal metallic and using my airbrush to paint it on. This is my Galeri Mobius 0.3, and if you're interested in this or any other airbrush from Galeri, I have links in the description to their website, plus a coupon code for 10% off your order. To build the base, I'm using this craft store frame that I got from the bargain bin. It's great because it has some room on top to work and room on the bottom for electronics. I drill a hole in the side for a switch, and then another hole in the back for some extra wiring. This will be where the main power goes into. I sand everything down to give it a bit of a nicer finish, and then I remove this Love More, Live More, which will stay in my shop for some extra motivation while working. I paint the frame black with some spray paint, and then I use some Mod Podge to fill in the seam between the board and the frame because I'm going to be filling it with plaster of Paris and I don't want it to leak everywhere. I add a bit of paint, some gray and black, to my plaster of Paris just to darken it because I'm not going to be painting it later, and so I need a bit of color to work from. I made it a little too thick, but that's okay. With the help of a tool, I can spread it out over my frame. I pop a few bubbles, and then I can let it dry. If you couldn't already tell, the base is supposed to be the moon, and so I'm going to add a few craters. I grab a couple of circular bits from my bits box, and I use these to score in a few shapes onto the plaster, and this is where I will build my craters from. Once I have my circles marked out, I can mix up another small batch of plaster of Paris, and I'm going to be using a needle to build up the craters like a 3D printer. So if you're a little squeamish about needles, look away now because I'm going to be uncapping this pretty soon. I'll let you know when I finish, okay? I pull up some plaster up into the syringe, and then I trace the outside of the circle that I made. I add a few layers, and I slowly build up the basic shape of the crater. When you add wet plaster onto dry plaster, the wet plaster dries very quickly, so I take a wet paintbrush and I start to mold the actual shape of the crater, blending the walls into the surrounding plaster. For the smaller craters, I'm using various drill bits and just holding them in my hand, I use the tip of the bit to bore out the shape. I want to take this time to thank my patrons over on my Patreon. Your support is truly out of this world, and I'm so grateful for all of your support. Thank you. This is the wooden dowel I'll be using to hold the rocket in the air and to build the lights and exhaust from. I drill a hole in the base to fit the dowel, and then I add an extra wooden block underneath the base to add some stability. I then add a second hole next to the first one for the wires. Once the plaster has fully dried, I add a layer of Mod Podge water to seal the plaster, and then I add a grayish black paint layer to add some shadows, followed by a dry brushing from a light gray. If you're liking what you're seeing, please consider dropping a like, subscribing, commenting, all that good stuff that helps these videos grow. These are the lights I'll be using. I got them online and they plug into the wall, converting 120 volts from the wall into 12 volts. It comes with a wall plug, an adjustable dimmer switch, which I won't be using since it's a bit bulky and I just want to use a switch that turns it on and off, and then of course the light strip itself. The lights came with 16 feet of it, but I only ended up using about a foot of it. I wrapped the lights around the dowel using the adhesive back and a bit of super glue to attach them. I don't think you're supposed to bend them this tight, but it all worked out in the end, so it's okay. Once it's in place, I can solder up some wires, and then I cover the light with a plastic tube to try to help diffuse the light a bit. For the exhaust effect, I'm using a technique that I've used a few times in other models I've made here. I'm using polyfill batting, which is the stuff you'd find in a stuffed teddy bear or any other sewing project, and I use that to build out the shape of the exhaust fumes and the smoke. I attached it all using hot glue. It's rare that I use hot glue in my projects nowadays, but for this application, it's the best choice. I keep adding small pieces of polyfill until I build up the shape that I want. To paint the exhaust, I'm using this yellow, gray, and black and applying it with my airbrush. I use the yellow as the flame color and then the gray and the black as the shadows. I try to make a gradient with the gray and the black to add a bit of depth and scale. It's a balance because I don't want to cover up too much of the original white color, but I also don't want to cover up too much of the yellow when I apply the gray and the black, so I just try to add little bit by little bit until I'm happy with the final result. We're entering the final stretch here, and I can start to add all of my electronics and start to attach everything together. I add my switch, the main power supply, of course the exhaust and the wires that are connected to that, and then I can solder everything together. Those fumes are definitely not the best for you, so work in a well-ventilated area if you're going to get into soldering. I glue the exhaust down to the base and finally attach the rocket to the dowel with a wire. All I have to do now is just make sure the lights actually work, and with that, this project is pretty much finished. Thank you so much for watching and sticking around till the end of the video. If you like this video, consider dropping a like, consider subscribing. I've got a bunch of other videos on my channel, over 150. So if you like this one, I'm sure you'll like at least one other. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, put them down in the comment section and I'll try to get back to you. I've got links in the description to my Amazon storefront for all the tools and materials that I use during my videos. Thank you again for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.